what we're going to talk about this evening, and we'll say the prayer for study before we get started, but we're going to be talking about Midrash. We're going to be looking at a little bit of talking about what is Midrash, where we see it, the difference between halachic and agadic Midrash. There's two different types. Then we're going to actually look at some Midrashim based on the Akedat Yitzchak, the story of the binding of Isaac. We're going to look at it through the lens of Midrash, and hopefully something will be new and exciting and cause you to see it in a different light. And then, if time permits, we'll do what I love, which is I'm going to give you a prompt. I'm going to give you a text with a problem or with a question, and you'll solve it in your own creative way. All right? So that's sort of the outline for today. Let's say the prayer for study, and then we'll get right into it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share, actually I'm not going to share my screen quite yet. I'll share that in just a moment with you.
You want us to mute ourselves?
I think everybody is pretty quiet in their background. If you feel like you have some background noise, go ahead and mute yourself. If I start hearing stuff, I'll mute, but for now it sounds like it's fairly quiet, and this way we can interact easier. So what is Midrash? Before we get into talking about what it is, what do you know? What do you, any words that come to mind, anything that you've learned, if you've studied it before, what is Midrash? Anyone?
I said they're stories.
Stories, perfect, yes, they are stories, exactly. And stories about what?
The Bible.
Right,
the Torah,
so,
right?
Yep. So there's stories, right, that are rabbinic. Okay, so this is traditionally rabbinic writing, although there is something that's called modern midrash, which is someone like Anita Diamant, who wrote the book The Red Tent. This is considered a modern midrash. Anybody can write midrash. Okay, this is not God-given. This is written by humans. The rabbis traditionally did it, but anyone can do it. So stories is traditionally, and that's what we would call agadic midrashim, which we'll get to in a moment. Anything else you want to add? What is the point of a midrash?
Explaining some of the gaps in the Torah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Some of the, we usually think about Genesis and all the family stories and things that were left out. The rabbis expended on. They didn't have Netflix, so they spent a lot of time.
That's true. That's true. That's a great way to put it. So filling in the gaps. So when we read our biblical text, questions come up. What does this mean? Why is this here? What's missing, right? And that's where Midrash comes in, is it fills in those gaps and helps us to answer some questions that we may have in the text. Yes?
So my take is that a Midrash is a point of view, and that it's easy to disagree with that particular point of view or agree with it, or it is interpretive and lends interest to the Torah text, but it's not necessary. For example, there'll be a Torah text and somebody will say, well, there's a Midrash that says, et cetera, which could be like a conspiracy theory or not, So it's elaborative, but open to interpretation or open to discussion, I would say.
Absolutely. That's an important point, is that this is man written. There's no question whether or not this is man written. This is not given by God. And so there can be multiple different opinions, and they all would be correct, right? Because they're all neither one is better than the other. And they shouldn't be taken too literally, right? Because this I think was the fun, kind of like what Jane said, they didn't have Netflix. This was how they had their fun, right? They made up stories and played with the text in an interesting way. So I mentioned it before. What do you think? Let's see. There's the difference between halachic and agadic midrashim. Any ideas out there? What would be the difference?
Halacha is law.
Right. So halacha would be the law. Okay. So maybe it's midrashim based on law.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas agadic is more based on the narrative. Okay, so let me give you an example of this. So a halachic midrash, for example, may be when you have the law of Shabbat, right? That, that on Shabbat, there's no work, there's no driving, there's no, turning on a stove or oven, right? We have all these laws of how to keep Shabbat. A halachic midrash may be a question as to what happens on Shabbat, let's say, that my son falls and breaks his leg. Am I allowed to get in a car and drive to the hospital, right? What do you think is the answer?
Yes.
Of course.
Of course, right. But that, again, would be a midrash, which would be an explanation of why it's okay. And obviously, we talk about pikuach nefesh, which is the saving of a life, outweighs the observance of Shabbat. Okay, so that's an example. Those are way less interesting. We don't tend to, in this class, we're not going to spend a lot of time on halachic midrashim, more so on the Agadic. Was there a question, Myra? Mm-hmm.
No, I just wanted to make a small comment from the actual word Agadic, because to me, it's always meant literally you're telling a story.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because the Agadah,
that's absolute. Yep, the
right.
Agadah, absolutely. That's exactly right.
In my mind, the halachic are the laws and the Agadic are the storytelling, which means the more colloquial or custom. That's all.
Yep, you're absolutely right, and that's exactly true. So the difference, again, the halachic or the legal, they try to prove a law's authenticity, and it often will connect a rabbinic law to a biblical law. Okay, so they'll take a biblical law about Shabbat and then connect it to a rabbinic law in this midrashic, in this using midrash. Agadic is focused on the non-legal portions of the Torah. And there's greater freedom, obviously, to be creative in that way. And it comes out with legends and parables, and I think are way more interesting. So an example, before we get into what we're actually going to look at today, I love this one, is a question asked, let's say in an Agadic midrash, would be, why is the first letter of the Torah a bet? And I'm going to share on the screen. I'm sure you can all imagine what that looks like, but I'll bring it up for you to see, which may help. So the question I want you to think about is, why does the Torah begin with the letter bet? Let's bring this up.
That's it.
Everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So put on your thinking creative caps, and what are some ideas? Why the letter bet?
Yeah, I know the answer.
Oh, tell us the answer then.
The answer is very obvious. This was a creation, and the Aleph had not been invented yet.
I like that answer. The Aleph had not been invented yet. Any other ideas?
Sure. Bereshit.
Right. Right. So you're saying because it had to start with the word Bereshit, right? About creation. Okay. Okay. Any other ideas why exactly the letter bet? I'll give you a hint. Look at the shape of it. Anything about the shape tell us something?
A flame.
It's open on one side so you can enter.
Ah, you're getting close. Yeah. And what way? Think about how we read Hebrew. Which way does it open?
To the left.
Yeah, exactly. It all begins, right? It all begins here, and then we continue in this direction. All right? So very simply, that's an Agadic midrash. Why does the Torah start with the letter bet? Because of the look of it, the shape, it opens up into the whole Torah. Okay?
That's great.
All right, so now what we're going to do, I know that was a really brief intro. We could probably spend an entire lesson just talking about what is Midrash. I'm going to stop that share. Are any questions before we move on to actually looking at some Midrash? All right, so now I'm going to share something else on the screen. Give me a moment to pull this up. One moment. It's not pulling up.
Too bad.
Picture is amazingly clear. It's amazing how clear the picture is.
Mm-hmm. It's a good computer.
How zoom is really just amazing.
Okay, now I can share it. So like I shared before, we're going to be looking closely at the story of the Akedah the near sacrifice of Isaac by his father Abraham. Yitzchak, by his father Abraham, and we're going to look at as we go through. You'll see that there are parts that are highlighted. Those are going to be the parts that the rabbis have commented on using Midrash to help us understand it a little bit deeper. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So the way that I organize this is I put a verse, I highlighted the parts that the rabbis are going to focus on, and then these passages that are included come from the, I can actually hold it up for you. It's called Sefer Agadah. Looks like this. Oh, there we go. Now you can see it. In English, it's called the Book of Legends, and it's a compilation of Midrashim organized by the books in the Torah, and then also organized by theme. It's a wonderful book. If you like Midrash, it's going to be a great one for you to maybe invest in. So let's begin. So, and it came to pass after these things that God did prove Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. Okay, this is the beginning of this passage, Genesis 22, and we're looking at verses 1 to 19, right? So after these things, right? So the rabbis say, after what things? What exactly is God referring to, right? So now they come and comment. And it came to pass after these things that God tried Abraham. After what things? According to Rabbi Yochanan, citing Rabbi Yosef ben Zimra, after the things Satan had to say. Satan, okay? So we hear this Satan often. I'm just going to let someone in. Someone wants to join us. We have a reference to, we say in English Satan, but in Hebrew you'd say Satan, right? The Satan is usually someone who challenges God, okay? Where is another story that you can think of, a biblical story, that we have a challenge like this of Satan coming to God? I'll give you a clue. It's somebody in the Bible who has some really bad things happen to him. Job, absolutely, right? So this is the same Satan, right, who came and made a deal with God, right? A bet is now approaching, right? And this, it comes up in this midrash. So Satan had to say, following the feast given upon the child having grown and being weaned. Okay, so when the child has grown and been weaned, usually in Jewish tradition that's at 3 years old. So this is assuming that there was a big celebration when Isaac turned 3. Satan spoke up to the Holy One, to God, Master of the universe, out of the entire feast that this old man, upon whom you bestowed fruit of the womb at the age of 100, out of the entire feast he prepared, could he not have spared, say, one turtle dove, one fledgling as an offering to you? All right, so in this midrash, they're saying that after these things is referring to this feast that Abraham put on for his son, that he didn't even make a sacrifice to God, right? He didn't even spare something small, right? And God replied, is it not true that Abraham prepared the feast in honor of his son? Still, if I say to him, sacrifice your son to me, he will sacrifice him at once. Satan said, try him. At once, God tried Abraham. All right. So a little bit of a twist on this, right? Of what you normally would think. It sounds like God comes to Abraham with this grand plan to test him. But this, the rabbis switch it up a little bit. They make it sound as though this was a bet of some sort, right? That Satan came and told God, I don't think Abraham's going to follow what you tell him to do.
Right. He didn't have the idea himself. He got pushed on him by Satan.
Right. And if you look back now, if you look at Job, it's almost the exact same thing, right? It's Satan who comes and puts the idea in God's head to test Job. Yeah. All right. And he said, take now thy son, thine only son, whom thou lovest, even Isaac, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I tell thee of. And Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his ass and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he cleaved the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went into the place of which God had told him. So there's a few different parts here that, oh, yes.
Can I interrupt with a question?
Absolutely.
I don't have the Hebrew in front of me, but the word cleave, because we just read the book of Ruth, and we talked a lot about devek and the word cleave, is it really the same word in Hebrew, in the Hebrew text? Is that
So
the,
I
you know my-
don't have the Hebrew text open in front of me. I'd have to double check. If you want to wait at the end, we can double check it. But I would assume it's, if I had to guess, I would guess it was lidabek. Yeah, the same word.
but isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yep.
we think of it with Ruth and Naomi,
Yep.
and it's so, I mean, every child in Hebrew school knows it. Do you know what I mean? That
Absolutely.
this is the first time I've seen it out of the book of Ruth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, let's take a look at that at the end. Let's go back and look at the Hebrew text. Thank you for bringing that up. So I highlighted 3 different parts in these 2 verses that the rabbis are going to comment on. One is take now thy son, right? What do you think a question would be that the rabbis have about that? Any idea what the question might be?
You mean about those words, take now thy son?
Yep. Where do you think, before I show you the Midrash, that the rabbis may have a comment on? What is the question maybe that they're looking to solve in that those few words?
What do you think? Not sure.
Why would he?
Perhaps
sacrifice
it's.
his son?
Say it again, Meyer.
Why would he sacrifice his only son?
Okay. So maybe it's about why. Okay. Another one may be, and this is what we're going to look at, is which son? Doesn't Abraham have 2 sons?
Yep.
That's right.
Right. So take now thy son, and which son? Right. That could be the most obvious question right now. Is which one are you talking about, God? It's not until he gets to a few verses or a few words down does it say Isaac.
It says thine only son.
Right. That's another problem too, right? Why does it say thine only son? We know that Abraham has 2 sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Right.
Well, that's
We're going to hold that thought, because we're going to look at that in something in just a minute. And offer him, right? So what does it mean to offer him? Okay, so that's going to be another one of the questions. And then the last part of this verse that we're going to look at is, and Abraham rose early in the morning. The rabbis are going to ask, why early? Why did they have to clarify? Why couldn't they just say, and Abraham rose and went, right? Why do they have to clarify? Why is it these words here that it was early in the morning? So now let's take a look at the Midrash.
it's a long walk.
Take now thy son, Abraham. I have 2 sons. Which do you mean? God, thine only son. Abraham, both are only sons. Okay, so now it's talking about his only son from 2 different women, right? Each woman only has 1, so maybe that's what he means by thine only son. Isaac is the only son I have from his mother, and Ishmael is the only son I have from her, who is his mother. God, the son whom thou lovest. Abraham, master of the universe. Are there separate compartments in one's inmost self for love? I love them both. God, very well. Then Isaac, right? So if we look back at that verse, you can see it took God a long time to get to the name Isaac, right? Take down thy son. Okay, but I have 2. Thine only son. No, I have 1 from each mother, right? Whom thou lovest. I love them both. Okay, fine. God, if you're pushing me, if you have to make me say it, then it's Isaac. Okay? Why did God drag out his command to such length? So that Abraham's mind might not be stunned by such a heart-rending demand. So maybe this was a way of God drawing it out a little bit to make it a little bit easier to hear. Right? The next one, and offer him up there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains. Abraham asked, which mountain? God says, wherever you see my glory standing and waiting for you. All right, so not too clear, okay, but wherever we see God's glory. Abraham meditated in his heart, saying, what am I to do? Shall I tell Sarah, his wife? Women tend to think lightly of God's commands. I'm not crazy about that verse, but I didn't write this. If I do not tell her and simply take off with him, afterward, when she does not see him, she will strangle herself. What did he do? He said to Sarah, prepare food and drink for us, and we will rejoice today. She asked, why today more than other days? Besides, what is the rejoicing about? Abraham says, old people like ourselves, to whom a son was born in our old age, have we not cause to rejoice? So she went, prepared the food. During the meal, Abraham said to Sarah, you know, when I was only 3 years old, I became aware of my maker. But this lad, growing up, has not yet been taught about his creator. Now there is a place far away where youngsters are taught about him. Let me take him there. Sarah said, take him in peace. All right, so a little workaround there to, I'm sure you've all seen, what is that movie? My Big Fat Greek Wedding. where they say we need to make people, there's a scene where it talks about making people think that it's their idea, right? Where the wife makes the father think it's his idea. In this way, Abraham is using a little technique to make Sarah think that it's her idea, that Abraham takes their son for a little vacation to discover God. And the question next is about why does it say early in the morning? And Abraham rose up early in the morning. Why early in the morning? Because he said it may be that Sarah will reconsider what she said yesterday and refuse to let Isaac go. So I'll get up early and go while she is still asleep. Moreover, it is best that no one sees us. All right. So the answers to the questions we had asked, right? Especially this last one, I think makes a lot of sense. Why early in the morning? So that Sarah can't change her mind. Right. Any thoughts on these? Had you heard any of these before?
Not the Midrash, no.
But Abraham, who, I mean, we admired, assuming the rabbis had admired him, as being very, what kind of duplicitous.
Yeah. Right. It doesn't put Abraham in the best investment, right? In the best light.
Yeah, but don't forget now, he's talking to God. I mean, he's got a different relationship. It's not this is a relationship that he's really almost, whatever God tells him, he's going to do.
But this is the rabbis commenting.
Well, this rabbi in particular, I think, has a real bias.
Against what?
Well, I think he likes to play around with Satan. I bet in a lot of his comments, Satan is a focal point.
And that is true. It's hard to tell in the Midrashim who
I don't
is
even
the
know
author.
that rabbi. I just know him by name, and I know he's very biased. But that's okay because they were human, and we didn't. The thing is, we really don't know their biases. That's a midrash in and of itself to explain their biases.
Absolutely. And you have to put yourself in their time period, right? To understand some of the bias.
Sure.
Yeah. Right. Let's continue. Oh, you had a question? Yep.
It's Robert.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you'll excuse me, but to me, the whole thing is foolishness. First of all, the first comment that he should sacrifice him because when he was born, you didn't have a big party where you sacrificed a turtle dove or whatever the heck it was, and then this follow-up and the rationalization with Sarah. I mean, quite honestly, it's fun, but it's not study. If you know, this is not about you. It's just, and I get it that you are laying out what it means to have a midrash and the agakic versus the halachic, et cetera, et cetera. But really, I mean, yeah, I had a friend years ago who gave a speech at Temple, and he said, if you're lying in bed at night and you get a message from God that says, hey, get up early in the morning and take your favorite son and go to the mountain and sacrifice him, he said, call your shrink. So I mean, this, I'm not sure where this is going or if it's going, but it's really way out there.
It is. You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. In fact, when I use Midrash, I often say, I don't know what these people were smoking. I don't know what drugs they were on when they wrote some of the stuff. It's really out there, a lot of it.
Wasn't there a lot of this in that time?
There was what?
No, where they sat around and made up stories.
Sure.
Yes,
Sure.
and that goes back to the very beginning when what Jane said. They didn't have Netflix to entertain them. This is how they entertain themselves. And that's why every time that we spend time looking at Midrash, I have to feel like I have to give a disclaimer that we should not take this too seriously because they didn't take it too seriously.
I forgot.
Right? This was their fun.
What was the name of this rabbi? I forgot. We could go back. What was
You know,
what was his name?
Yochanan, was it?
Yochanan, right. And I'm thinking when Yochanan is sitting around the table with the rest of the boys, and he comes up and they all go, oh my God, another Satan story.
You're absolutely right. That's likely how it played out.
Sure.
All right, let's keep going. Let's keep going. On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder, and we will worship and come back to you. So now Abraham is going off alone with his son. And Abraham took the word of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac, his son. And he took his hand, the fire and the knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spoke unto Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here am I, my son. And he said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Okay, so Isaac is getting a little nervous, right? I see you have everything, but where's the actual sacrifice? And Abraham said, God will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. All right, so Abraham kind of calmed Isaac's fears.
Where did you come up with the idea that Isaac is nervous? Is that you, or is there something in here that I'm missing?
Yeah, because he's here when Isaac says, behold the fire and the wood. I see you have the stuff to do a sacrifice, but where is the sacrifice?
I'm not sure that
No, you don't read that as anxiety?
I think Isaac is just double checking his father to make sure that his father's got everything in line here.
But he doesn't.
Okay. So maybe I'm reading it, knowing the end. I'm reading it knowing the
father was
the backstory.
Somewhat forgetful. I'm making this up as I go along.
Hey, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Let's see what the rabbi said. So the next Midrashim are going to comment on these verses that I highlighted. So, and Abraham took the word for the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac. Behold the fire in the wood, but where is the lamb? Okay, and they went both of them together. Okay, so those are going to be the verses that the rabbis comment on. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, as upon one condemned who is made to carry the cross upon his shoulder. All right, interesting. Like we just said, you have to read this knowing what historical time it's being written and what do they know, right? And Isaac said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? In that instant, fear and dread, terror fell upon Isaac when he saw in Abraham's hand nothing at all fit for an offering. So, suspecting what was intended, he asked, where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham replied, the Holy One has chosen you. Isaac said, if he has so chosen, my life is given to him, but I grieve for my mother. Nevertheless, they went both of them together, one to bind, the other to be bound, one to slaughter, the other to be slaughtered. All right, so Al, you may be correct. I may have just read ahead.
But you knew the rest of the story.
I knew the story.
I didn't know it. So I just said, well, he just looked at his father and he said, boy, Dad, you forgot something.
That's Al.
All right. So what do you find interesting about this?
I've always had so much trouble with this story. I mean, the biblical story. I think, the rabbis did and everybody did, but they're right now commenting that not the essential part, although they did put into Isaac's mouth the worry about his mother.
Right, not for himself, that he's about to be killed, right?
But they're not dealing with the horror of a parent taking, being willing to take a child's life for God. I mean, it's anyone who's a parent or has watched parents just knows it's a very problematic story, this story.
It is. And what's interesting is I only brought you part of the Midrashim that's written about this. There's a lot that's written Midrashim wise, and none of them deal with the big question. The closest they get is we're gonna look at it in a few minutes is Sarah's reaction and how horrified she is at what could have happened. But in terms of the internal dread inside Abraham, we don't really get that. All right. And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. All right, so we're going to look now at a midrash that talks about and bound Isaac his son. When Abraham was about to begin the sacrifice, Isaac said, "Father, bind my hands and my feet, for the urge to live is so willful that when I see the knife coming at me, I may flinch involuntarily, causing the knife to cut improperly, and thus disqualify myself as an offering. So I beg you, bind me in such a way that no blemish will befall me." So Abraham bound his son well. Then Isaac said to Abraham, "Father, don't tell mother about this while she is standing over a pit or on a rooftop, for she might throw herself down and be killed." All right, so again, Isaac not only is allowing it to happen, but is even so faithful in this way that he says, "Bind me so that I can't involuntarily pull away." Right? And then again, like I said, it does reference telling Sarah, don't tell Sarah about this horrible act, right? Because she's going to commit suicide if she hears.
How old is Isaac here?
So we're not quite sure, but we do think that he's actually a man, that he's not a kid, right? Whenever it's depicted, like a illustration, we always think about it's shown Isaac as a little boy, but things that I've read about, it says Isaac was probably in his 20s, 30s even.
So he was knowledgeable of a lot of things, which tells you he's not a child.
He's not a child, exactly.
I mean, he knew about the proper way to
make an offering.
Yeah, he knew how to cut and so forth, where the cuts were supposed to be made, so on.
Again, though, keep in mind that this is the rabbis talking, right? They're putting words in Isaac's mouth.
The author always has that privilege.
Right. Let's keep going. And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." And he said, "Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou art a God-fearing man, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thy only son, from me." Right? So you passed the test, Abraham. You're not going to have to sacrifice your son. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold him, a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. So we're going to talk now about the ram, right? This magical ram appearing out of nowhere. Throughout that day, Abraham saw the ram become entangled in a tree, break loose and go free. Become entangled in a bush, break loose and go free. Then again, become entangled in a thicket, break loose and go free. The Holy One said, "Abraham, even so will your children be entangled in many kinds of sin and trapped within successive kingdoms, from Babylon to Media, from Media to Greece, from Greece to Edom." Abraham asked, "Master of the universe, will it be forever thus?" God replied, "In the end they will be redeemed. At the sound of the horns of this ram, as it is said, the Lord shall blow the horn, the shofar, when he goes forth in the whirlwinds at Teman Edom." All right, so a little bit of a commentary explaining the ram and this ram getting caught and breaking loose and going free. That's similar to the people of Israel that are going to go through trials and tribulations, but ultimately will come out well in the end. Any commentary on that?
It's a nice ending.
Robert.
I mean, the story itself is a tough one, and it's sometimes difficult to squeeze spiritual or intellectual juice out of it, although a lot of us and a lot of you have tried. So then you have this overlay of what looks like a short story. In a way, it's literarily interesting because it shifts the focus of the narrative from Abraham to Isaac. And, it talks about the belief factor. Isaac says, I forget what he says, the master of the universe wants us perfect and I can't be blemished, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And by the way, don't tell mom about this if she's cooking or near a cliff. So what I think, what occurs to me is, from an historical perspective, you had these people who were skilled, okay, call them rabbis, but they were skilled at weaving stories. And we didn't have Netflix. I'm not even sure the printing press was invented, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what they did. They were, in my worldview, they were as intelligent as people are today. Maybe they didn't have the technology. And what did they do? They told stories. Mm-hmm. So going back to my first point, as difficult as it is to find meaning in the original story, this doesn't help. It's fun. It's an interesting story. It's a nice narrative, but that's all it is. It's people with time in their hands weaving stories.
I would agree with you. This isn't. Yeah, this isn't the place for a spiritual or meanul moment, right? This is more so, like you said, this is entertainment.
It's fun.
It's fun. Jane,
they're trying to tie it, so they bring the ram in here, and then they say, "Well, this ram got tangled, and he broke loose," and to tie it in with the history that they know came out, after this, because they're living in a later period of time, and they're bringing in the story of the people in their telling here. So
absolutely.
They make Abraham ask, "Is it always going to be like this?" Or, like almost like we say all the time, are we going to be dealing with wars and anti-Semitism and so on? It seems like that's what they're trying to get at here. But and then they have God say, "No, in the end they'll be redeemed." But and when the shofar is sounded, which is what we do on the holiest day of the year.
That's right.
Right.
You, Thank you.
She's good.
That was great.
She must be married to a rabbi.
That was great.
No.
Oh, you don't want to do that.
I can only do that because I'm also the daughter of a rabbi. Yes, and Jane, thank you for that. That's absolutely right. I think of this as also a little bit of self-talk, right? That they're saying, look, it turned out okay. It's going to turn out okay for us, right? It's a little bit of that self-therapy. And then also it makes this connection at the end to Rosh Hashanah, right? Mm-hmm. That we read this story on Rosh Hashanah because of this connection, right? And the blowing of the shofar, right, is all connected in.
A quick question.
Yes.
When the story talks about carrying the cross, is that a reference to Jesus?
Well, not necessarily to Jesus, but to that time period, right? When this was a punishment.
All right.
Let's look at all right, the end of the story. And Abraham called the name of that place Adonai Yireh, it said to it, as it is said to this day, in the mount where the Lord is seen. And this is interesting. I didn't bring a commentary on this, but it's understood that this took place on Mount Moriah. Does anybody know where Mount Moriah is in Israel, modern day Israel?
Is it near Jordan?
Near Jordan? It is near Jordan, but it actually is in a city that you all know very well.
Tel Aviv?
Jerusalem.
Yep. In fact, it's the site. The belief is that it's the site of where the Holy Temple was built, right? Where many of us, I'm sure, have visited the Western Wall. Has everybody here been to the Western Wall?
Yep.
Yeah. So the belief, and if you've ever done has anyone done the tunnel tour underneath the wall?
A little bit.
Right? So when you go through those tunnels, you actually can come up to the spot that they say is Mount Moriah, where this almost sacrifice took place. Right? So that's just a fun fact. And we conclude the story, and the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham a second time out of heaven and said, by myself have I sworn, said the Lord, because thou hast done this thing, hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven, as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall be all the nations of the earth, to be blessed. Hear my voice. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. All right. So that is the story with a little bit of midrash in it. With the little bit of time we have left, I now have a challenge for you. So you all are now going to put on the cap of a midrashist, okay, and come up with your own answers. So for the creative writing, and you don't have to write this, you can just think of it and then we'll share. I have 3 verses here, okay? Each of them is talking and explaining about manna, right? The food, the heavenly food that was given, right, as the Israelites were in the desert. But what's interesting is it's described in 3 different ways, very different ways, okay? So in Exodus 16:15, that's the first time it comes up. The verse says, and when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they knew not what it was. And Moses said unto them, it is the bread which the Lord hath given you to eat. So raise your hand if you've thought of manna as bread. Yeah. Right? But if you look just a few verses down, and the house of Israel called the name thereof manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. All right, so slightly different, right? So not necessarily bread, but a wafer made with honey, so very sweet, right? And then if you go all the way to Numbers, right? Numbers 11:8, it's described differently. The people went about and gathered it and ground it in mills or beat it in mortars and seethed it in pots, made cakes of it. And the taste of it was like a cake baked with oil. All right. So really rich, right? And it tastes like oil. So my question to you, okay, so you're going to have to put on those creative thinking caps. How does this manna appear in 3 different substances? Bread, honey, and oil. What would you, as somebody who needs to give an answer to this question, what would you say? Why does it appear in 3 different ways? Think about maybe who is eating it or why they're eating it, or you can come up with your own answers. And then I'll share with you the answer that the rabbis came up with. You can take a minute.
With the oil, you have to cook.
But in the end, it's that a wafer or a cake.
Here it's already cooked. It's done for you. Just gather it and eat it. Lazy way, right? Here, it's a little bit. Yeah, but down here you.
What are the Hebrew letters for manna?
For manna?
Mem,
nun, hey.
Mem, nun, hey. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Jane.
Well, I don't. It seemed to me that since it was like the only thing that they had to eat, or that they found it, and all the stuff that they brought with them from Egypt was certainly gone by then. So they had to live with what they're getting, the manna, and you've got. I never thought of it before. I thought of it as some substance, but here, if it's wafers made with honey, that's like cookies. It seems that it would have to appeal to the children and to, the sweets after you finish eating the substance. And then the oil is a richness. I mean, these are things that you have to have in your body to continue to live, I guess.
Okay.
I looked at the oil almost as a cooking ingredient, and that. Well, no, you had to work it. When you got the oil, you just didn't eat oil. You just didn't. You worked it. And up at the top, the first one with the bread. It says, it is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. Eat. So here, you don't have to do anything. Just eat. Gather it up and eat it.
You're onto something, Al. Yep.
Down at the bottom, you got oil. You got to work it. I mean, this is not a free ride here.
Right, and it says here, you have to ground it in the mills or beat it in mortars and see that it's hot, make cakes of it.
This is not, I'm just not giving it out there. You're not a bunch of people.
Okay, you're onto something. Keep that in mind. We're going to look at that.
Okay.
Any other ideas? Robert, yeah.
So the Israelites are wandering in the desert and they have nothing to eat, and all of a sudden they see something, they don't know what it is. And they say, oh, Moses says it's manna, and they say, oh, well, we don't know what that is, but it must be like bread. So then they taste it, and they find that it's sweet, and it's like coriander seed, and they say, oh, we'll call it manna. It's still manna. We're not exactly sure what it is, but it sustains us, not like empty carbs that bread is. And then they gain a certain degree of sophistication, and they say, wow, you know what, we can grind this up, we can make bread out of it, it's, make cakes, et cetera. And they that through their creativity, that they realize that it's something sustainable.
I love that. Wow. A real progression through them. Very nice. Any other ideas before I share the rabbinic response?
Go for it.
All right.
Well, I think that the word bread is strange, because you always hear about flour or the raw
substance.
The raw substance mixing with oil, because that's what was indigenous, that's what they had, and that's what they knew. Honey is also a natural ingredient that can be found along the way, or from Egypt, from wherever. So bread is a finished product in my mind, and it doesn't sort of go with it. And they made what they thought we would call bread out of the flour substance, whatever that was, and the oil substance, whatever that was, and then the sweetener thing was the honey thing. So I don't know.
You're onto something. You and Al are onto something here. Let's see.
I'm getting hungry reading this.
Thinking about it. All right, so there's two different midrashim I wanted to share. So the first one is, manna is described in scripture as bread, as honey, and as oil. How are the differing descriptions to be reconciled? Young men tasted it in the taste of bread, old people the taste of honey, and infants the taste of oil. All right, so who was it? Was that Robert who said the children for the sweetness? Was that you?
I said
Oh, or was that Jane? That was Jane. So you were close, right? Although here they said that the infants, the little ones, would taste the oil. I guess they need the fat to grow, right? So maybe that's why. And the young people would taste the bread, right? And the older people would taste the sweetness of the honey. So perhaps this rabbi says three different ways it was described is because it was for three different people. Everybody who tasted it slightly differently, right? The next one is where Myra and Al were going. It is written, when the dew fell in the camp in the night, the manna fell upon it. It is also written, the people shall go out and gather. And it is also written, the people went about to and fro to gather it. How are the three statements to be reconciled? For the righteous, it came right down to the doors of their tents. Ordinary people had to go out and gather it, but the wicked had to go about to and fro to gather it. Manna is also described as bread and as unbaked dough. And scripture also says that they ground it. How do we reconcile the differing descriptions? Well, the righteous received it as baked bread, ordinary Israelites as unbaked dough, and the wicked as grain yet to be ground in a hand mill. All right, so similar to where you were going, right? So the truly righteous had a finished product, right? The bread. Those that were just kind of average, they had the dough that they had to figure out what to do with. And the wicked, right? They had to start from the first step, right? They had to ground the wheat, the grain. All right.
Good. Very nice.
Well, you all did a wonderful job.
They're also bringing in a commentary about people, about different kinds of people here.
Yep, absolutely. Right.
The righteous, the wicked, and the ordinary people, which is most of us.
Yep. So most of us would have had to deal with the dough. Right. Well, that's where I wanted to go this evening. I wanted to show you a little bit about what Midrash is. We talked about the Agadic and Halachic. We looked at some Midrash in action as we read through Akedat Yitzchak. Maybe think about it slightly different when Rosh Hashanah comes around and we read this. I think you'll probably refer back to some of these Midrashim. And we finished with creative Midrash, where we actually had the opportunity to play like these rabbis did and come up with our own modern Midrashim. So once we have an opportunity to gather in person, I actually have a course that I wrote on creative Midrashim, where each week that we come together, we look at different sections of the Torah and look at the Midrashim. So hopefully one day when we're back together, we can delve deeper and explore more.